Spell Level A. Press Go to begin. Spell talk. F-L-U-T-E. Wrong. Try again. Talk. T-U-B-E. That is incorrect. The correct spelling of talk is T-A-L-K. Talk.
I always get it wrong. Welcome to Flute Tube. Today we're going to talk about how to make the most of your private music lesson time, because that private lesson time is precious and limited and often quite expensive. Disclaimer, this episode is not intended to pick on any of my current students. I'm lucky to have very dedicated and hardworking students. Everything in this episode is intended to encourage, not chastise. Part 1. Am I spell check? Probably most of you are way too young to have played with Speak and Spell in your past. But when I was growing up, my grandparents had one of these at their house for us, and it was one of our favorite games to play when we went to visit them. It's a tool to learn how to spell, and these days we have much more sophisticated things. The reason I brought out the Speak and Spell is that when you come to your private lesson, there are a variety of things that might occur. We might spend a long time going over some really fundamental technique, like how to do vibrato or exactly where your tongue should be placed in your mouth. These are really important exercises, and they might take the majority of your lesson time. Or you might be getting ready for a really important performance, like a recital or a competition, and we have to skip the technique altogether. It goes straight to your pieces to make them as polished and perfect as possible for your upcoming event. What you really want to avoid doing with your precious lesson time is to turn your teacher into some variety of a spell check. That's what I feel like sometimes, and I even joke with my students about it sometimes, that it is part of my job to be spell check. But hopefully I can be much more useful. I feel like spell check when we spend a lot of lesson time going over music that someone has barely looked at. I'm most likely correcting rhythms and notes. I might be saying things like that F sharp carries through the entire measure, or that's a B natural, not a B flat. I might be fixing note values, reminding you that you're pulsing in eighth notes instead of quarter notes, and so some of your notes are only half as long as they're supposed to be. If you don't really have your piece in your fingers and your ears yet, we might spend your entire lesson correcting little mistakes that you could figure out just fine on your own if you just spent another hour or two on that particular piece of music. Think about what a luxury it is to have private music lesson time. When you're in college, you won't get so much one-on-one time with any other professors, and before college, you or your parents are going to be spending anywhere from $30 to $500 an hour if you get a fancy enough teacher. That's a lot of valuable time and possibly money and resources to be giving up to have private lessons if the main function of your teacher is to be your spell check. That means you should really use your own practice time better so that you're getting more use out of your private teacher. The more you can minimize that spell check role of your teacher, which will always be there, but the more you can minimize that, the more you will get out of your private lessons. Part 2. Am I a répétiteur? Have you heard this word before, répétiteur or répétiteur? If you have heard that word, you probably associate it with opera or ballet, because these days it's generally used to refer to a coach, either in an opera company or a ballet company. But in the Paris Conservatory, there were a lot of répétiteurs who were coaches for the students. There were the main professors in topics, and then there were the teaching assistants in order to prepare students for their more important work with their main professor. They would meet with the répétiteur to be coached and work on fundamentals. And in fact, it wasn't limited to work within a school like the Paris Conservatory. In Paris, if you came from a rich enough family and you were serious about music, your family might hire a répétiteur to come sit there while you practiced and give you feedback just to make your practice more efficient so you could get more done in preparation for meeting with your professor. I know this because I have a friend whose musical family was Jewish and well off just before the Nazi occupation of Paris. His family owes a lot to the répétiteur who was there working with his grandma when she was a little girl, because it was that répétiteur who hustled his grandma and her whole family out of Paris just before the Nazis came in and occupied. Generally speaking, the role of the répétiteur or répétiteur is a really good one. You might be working on tone or vibrato or just note accuracy, rhythm accuracy, and the répétiteur just talks you through things. They might say, this piece has 5 sharps. I keep hearing A naturals, things like that. Again, just remedial work that helps you prepare to see your professor. Since I'm a music professor, I'll leave it to you to guess whether I would rather be treated as your répétiteur, you come to see to improve your practice hours, or whether I'm treated as the music professor, that you come and your music is well in place and we have the luxury of talking about things like phrasing and working on the art of breathing so that the breaths don't interrupt what you're trying to do musically. Those kinds of deep, difficult things that will make your performance a lot more polished and professional. But because we don't have separate répétiteurs, we don't have that luxury, it is part of my job to be sure that you're playing everything accurately. As an interesting side note that's related to all of this, we flutists tend to know that Taffanel taught at the Paris Conservatory. He taught his student Philippe Gaubert, who was a real star, and Gaubert taught Moise. Moise was also taught by Taffanel. But what we often don't realize is that Gaubert succeeded Taffanel, Moise succeeded Gaubert. However, Gaubert started out having Moise as a teaching assistant. Gaubert would work with the students on their repertoire and their more important musical things, and Moise would work with the students on getting a beautiful tone and great fingers, making their finger technique better. In fact, that's why we have so many little books written by Moise that address tone and simple finger exercises, because he was working on refining students' technique before they went to play for Gaubert. Part 3, I am Spartacus. Well, not actually me, but this abacus. This is just a reminder that we have this great class mascot, Spartacus the Abacus, and thank you again to Adrian for giving the abacus such an apt name all those years ago when I brought him out and introduced him to my flute class as our new class mascot. Not only is Spartacus the Abacus a cute name for an abacus, but it's very apt, because if you know anything about Spartacus, he worked hard to free slaves from bondage, and we all need to free our technique from bondage. Spartacus is your guy, and if you have not yet watched FluteTube episode 1, practice, 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 that's really important, because in that episode we go over a lot of practice tools. Spartacus is just one of several practice tools that you can use before you ever come to your private lesson, so that we can focus on more important things than trying to clean up your technique, which of course we'll still have to do sometimes. As a quick reminder about Spartacus, there are 2 basic ways that I like to use him. One is you pick a little run. It could just be a couple beats. It could be 2 or 3 measures. And you do it until you get it perfect. Get it perfect, you move 1 bead. You patiently move beads across until you move all 100 beads across. Then you will know that run so much better. The other way is to think of batting average. This is not just focusing on the sheer quantity of times that you do it, but the percentage likelihood that the next time you play that run, you'll get it right. The way this works is you play a run, you get it right, you move a bead over, you might move a few beads and then you get it wrong. You have to move the beads back, but you're probably only going to move these 10 beads. When you get it right 10 times in a row, perfect, you're done. That increases your batting average, because sometimes we play something 1, 2, 3 times perfect and we figure we've got it. but then the fourth time you don't get it. That means your percentage likelihood of getting it right might only be 30%. You want to up your chances that every single time you play the run, you'll get it right. But remind yourself of all of the practice techniques that we discussed in episode 1. If you haven't watched it, go back and watch it so that we can make the most of your lesson time, scoot you along into the most important musical and flute playing matters as quickly as possible. And once again, this is only intended as encouragement, not chastisement.
Spell level A. Press go to begin. Spell says F-L-U-T-E. Wrong. Try again. Says T-U-B-E. That is incorrect.